Kyle had a question over here. Hi, Deepa.
I'm going to ask my question first.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see you had the mic.
I want to go back to the CalPERS retiree coming back to teaching, whether it's a substitute, because a lot of CalPERS retirees do come back as, at least at the college level, full-time instructors. So are you saying, Liz, that if they are coming back and going into defined benefit, we'd still have to contact you to find out if their hours are reportable? Because as of now, they've never been subject to the 960 hours or anything like that.
See, where we need to like look at these is if the person ever was working for a school and was offered a certificated position and elected CalPERS membership and then retired from CalPERS. Okay, so if that person is collecting their CalPERS retirement benefit and then goes to teach, that person is subject to the CalPERS rules. That's why we want, so just because a CalPERS retiree tells you, hey, yeah, that's why we, okay, okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you were worried about the 180-day rule or if you're just worried about reporting in general. Okay.
I do want a little clarification on this because a lot of times I think it depends on the type, I mean, not only what it is, but the type of work the person is doing. So when you say independent contractor, if the person is doing a job that would not normally be covered by either PERS or STRS, and they're a retired person, do they have to wait the 180 days? And what I'm talking about is something totally outside the realm of what would normally be covered by PERS or STRS, like coming and
Yes.
installing some specific specialized equipment at the
Yes.
campus. So there is no 180-day waiting period.
No, by the letter of the law, there would be,
There
even
would
if
be.
they're considered an independent contractor. That's kind of the nuance here is before, if they were doing that kind of work and were an independent contractor, they were exempt,
Okay.
right, from any retired annuitant law.
Because-
But now
yeah.
now the new law kind of says, hey, these independent contractors, whether they're truly, right, because Liz alluded to the common law control test, and are they an employer, I mean, a true employee of that employer? That's part of the question, but really, even if they're not and deemed an independent contractor, they're still subject to the rules under PEPRA, meaning they must wait 180 days and they must be reported to CalPERS.
And I understand all the different nuances of someone who becomes a interim, vice president or coming and doing substitute work for some position that's there. But when you have something that is completely out, I mean, the
Those
example.
people aren't independent contractors, so the law
Okay, so then what do
specifically
you-
added those people to the umbrella of retired annuitants.
An example that I'd always use is let's say a school decided to install a nuclear power plant. And so they brought in a crew of people to build this nuclear power plant for them so they could go off the grid.
Right.
And so these are specialized people. They're going to build it and then leave.
Yeah.
And if you had someone there who happened to be a retired PERS member, they'd still have to wait 180 days before they could come and work.
If it was a direct contracting relationship. Right. So typically, if I'm building a nuclear power plant, I'm going to go hire a firm that's going to put this together, and they may go hire 100 CalPERS retirees. That's not a direct reporting relationship.
That's
So,
what I was looking for.
maybe that
So,
example
right.
helps.
And when you say third party, I always think of as some company who hires a bunch of people that then the district contracts with that company. So
Right.
those people are specifically not the 180 day.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
that answers it.
Right. That
It's
help?
just-
Yeah, but if you hired one guy to do it and he was a retired annuitant or she was a retired member, then it might apply.
Anthony, just interrupt, just because
Sure.
I want to make sure that there's an every chance, because CalPERS got sort of truncated last time, to make sure we have a chance to answer questions, but we are under a very tight time constraint, and there's only 15 minutes left allotted on the schedule. I mean, if you need more time, we can probably squeeze it out, but I just make sure that the important things get addressed.
And I think we're good. We're covering some of the stuff that's later in the presentation, so I think we'll be good. I'll just move forward a bit here, and then I'll
Before
You
we
want-
let
you wanna
Liz
touch on
leave
that?
the room.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to jump quickly back to the situation of a CalPERS retiree taking a certificated sub-position, et cetera. Because we have had that situation, and the guidance we received was, in fact, looking back for an election form, but because those are district-specific, that was the determining factor. So it wouldn't necessarily be have they ever signed an election form, but do we have one on file for past service?
Actually, it's if they've ever signed an election form is
Okay.
what we look at. So you got my email address, right? So if you
Yeah.
have a particular person in mind, you can email me or email Rosanna.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
And then there seems to be some confusion on that, so we should probably solidify a good, that's really not PEPRA related necessarily, because PEPRA talks about same retirement system and things like that, but this is just general employing a retired annuitant roles. So we'll see if we can get something more firm on that. So one other thing we're working on, we talked about that 200-05512, which was our initial circular letter in early December that kind of broadly covered PEPRA and the specific sections in PEPRA. And what we want to do is send out a revised one of those circular letters. I reached out to a few stakeholders, including some of you. I appreciate your feedback. I'm putting that together. We know we have a couple things to clean up. There's like an incorrect date for the old compensation cap in there. There's some language on equal health vesting that we need to tweak a bit based on new information. And then we really wanted to clarify, without creating a separate circular just for schools, we want to make sure it's clear in there when something just applies to the states or the schools. And so you guys have given me some of the feedback, and hopefully it spreads. Most of you would have similar questions. So I'm compiling all that feedback right now, and we're going to issue a new circular maybe in a few weeks, I would say. That's, again, kind of just a general, comprehensive, good foundation of how we're implementing certain things. So we're working on that as we speak. I can pretty much, the SB 13, I just pulled some things out. Most of it doesn't really pertain to you specifically. There's some judges stuff, some legislation stuff, some IDR stuff for safety members. We have the ARP program date that's maybe changing for state members. And then there's some proposed language, as Danny mentioned, trying to get in there about some health vesting language, again, clarification of some pensionable compensation, and then the Social Security offset issue that shouldn't apply to you because you're supplemental formula, so you don't have the offset. So covering some of the, we cover these frequently asked questions, but they often get revisited. So I'll just touch on these again. We pretty much got into it on everything but the benefit formula for new members, which is pretty clear. So we'll give you one more opportunity. As Ed said, we have about 15 minutes, and we'll see anything else we can ask in that time frame. Again, just covering the new formulas. We get this question all the time. Mainly, it's about the safety formula and where and how did my safety formula map to the new PEPRA formula. You have some school police, but other than that, you wouldn't be too concerned with the new formula. The contracts are not going to be updated right at January 1st. We're going to work on getting those revised contracts for every employer. We carried forward all your optional benefit provisions and just changed the formula and the final comp to 3 years, but everything else is staying intact. I will point out here that one of the circular letters, I believe is the pensional comp one, also touched on the provision about retroactive benefit increases. And we kind of spelled out some areas that would be considered retroactive benefit increases, that if you did contract for those in the future, it would only apply to future service. So an example is, if you were to increase your death benefit, which I don't think you can anymore, but if you could increase your death benefit, if there was a higher one than you already had, obviously you can't apply that to future service only, right? You either have the higher benefit or you don't have the higher benefit. So that wouldn't really fall into that retroactive benefit provisions. However, if you went and contracted for post-retirement survivor allowance, where that survivor automatically gets 25 or 50% of the allowance if the member were to die, that would be something that you could apply only to future service after that date. So it doesn't look at all 30 years and say, okay, when you retire and you're receiving, say it's 60% of your income, your significant other, your survivor, wouldn't receive 25% of that entire 30 years if they only contracted for it in the last 5 years. That piece would be calculated separately, and they'd have 25% of that calculation allowance. So that's just an example of what we've spelled out there. There's 6 or 7 the actuaries have identified that are actually tied to service. Again, so just wanted to point that out. The new member contribution rate, 50% of normal costs. We sent the circular to let you know what your normal cost is and the new member rate. Again, the circular letters that may impact those. We talk about normal costs. Danny and I have had several sessions and trying to get people a base understanding of normal cost. It's basically taking your entire workforce and figuring out what that next year of service will cost for that group of employees. So the things that affect normal costs would be a change in a benefit, right, from one year to the next, change in actuarial factors. If they do experience studies every 3 to 5 years, they look at the discount rate. Recently that changed. Those would be the kind of things that drive normal cost. Also, any drastic changes in your demographics of your employees. If your entire workforce retired and you hired all new 25-year-old people, then that would affect the normal cost for the following year. But in most cases, it stays pretty stable unless there's benefit increases or actuarial factor changes. Anything like investment losses or gains, you gave everybody salary increases that were unanticipated. Those go into the unfunded liability component of the employer rate. So that gets confused sometimes. So I like the way Danny put it one time, is anything that the actuaries get wrong, when they're making these assumptions, the things they get wrong go into the unfunded liability bucket. Whereas the normal rate is more of a constant, knowing what your workforce is for 1 year and calculating that cost for the following year. And then that unfunded liability is not part of determining that new member rate. Hopefully that's a little bit helpful. And then for school employers, the law encourages the 50-50 sharing of normal costs for current members, right? Classic members, sorry. We have current members up here, but classic members, it encourages to get to that point of 50-50 cost sharing and no employer-paid member contributions, right? There's no mandate. It does talk a little bit about imposing these things unilaterally after 2018 if it's part of collective bargaining. And then there are some caps involved of where it can go under PEPRA, 8% and 12% for safety. You can, under the PEARL, eliminate or reduce EPMC. We have 20516 for cost sharing. Before, you could only cost share if you increased your benefits. Then you could put in a cost sharing agreement where the employee, the members agree to share in that cost. Now it's really by bargaining unit or by benefit tier. You can cost share really for any reason. If it's just through negotiation, you say the member group is going to pay 3% of the employer costs, you can contract for that. With CalPERS. That's a formal, what we call a formal cost-sharing agreement. There are also informal cost-sharing agreements, but those contributions do not go into the member's contribution account. When you do 20516, that money actually increases that member rate, and those funds go into deposit for that member. And if they were to refund, they would get those back. Whereas an informal agreement, that is between the member and the employer. Pensionable comp, I won't go over all these. We talked about them as part of the circular letter. The key things that, key points that must be followed for it to qualify, the things that are outside that we're aware of. Let's see, anything, I think we covered most of this. And then working after retirement, I think we beat this to death without answering some of the other questions you might have. But, one of the things is, we're coming out with a clarification about a public safety officer that doesn't impact you all too much. But even if they're, for some reason, not subject to these new provisions, they are still subject to the bona fide separation rules that are currently in the PEARL. So they need to be normal retirement age if they're coming right back to work. If they're not normal retirement age, they must have that bona fide separation and service. So those all still apply, even if you had an exclusion. And if the member retired with an incentive, a golden handshake or some other incentive, they cannot get an exemption from the 180-day rule. I think those are some key points. These are some other provisions we've talked about before, but I won't go over all of them. There was a question, and I won't spend a lot of time on it because it's complex and we're working on some additional information, but regarding equal health vesting and whether that applies to current classic members as well as new, we're working on some FAQs. I don't know if we've put any out recently to kind of clarify the position on that. Danny, do you know?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
But we have confirmed with the legislature that they will be. We have heard from the legislature that they will be amending that provision to make it clear it only applies to new hires. So it won't impact anybody that's currently working, but any new hires, you will have to make sure that they're following that provision.
So that's it. Couple minutes for any final questions. Ramona?
I had a couple questions on the pensionable comp. What is the definition of during normal working hours? It keeps mentioning that during normal working. What is that?
Yeah. You want to address that, Terrence?
During normal working hours is establishing what services are being rendered for that person based on their normal working schedule, and speaks more to overtime, because overtime specifically excluded. It's excluded for classic, it's excluded for new members as well. For classified members, correct.
Person works an additional 10. When you're talking about overtime, you're talking about in addition to 40 hours a week. What if the member's position is, say, 30 hours a week and they do the additional time? That additional 10 hours for your classic is pensionable because it's under the 40 hours. Would it still be considered pensionable for your new members?
Yes. Yes. All hours up to 40 hours per week
Okay.
are reportable. Yep. And some of the gray areas around normal working hours are like things like standby pay and things like that, need to be reviewed. So, that's where overtime's like the clear one that's outside of normal working hours. But there are other things that come into play.
Because we consider that additional 10 hours, it's overtime for that position, but
Correct.
it's still
Correct.
pensionable for both.
Yes.
Okay. Then for items that are paid out yearly, but it's consistent that it's yearly payouts, like your longevity or like a bonus for a good attendance, would that be considered PERSable for your new members?
Have we flushed that out? The
I mean, it is consistently paid
pay.
every year or every quarter.
Yeah.
What we have looked at and analyzed up to this point is contained in that circular letter that was referenced. I think it was 200-06212. I know that dialogue will continue, and we'll continue to look at that definition, which is contained in pensionable comp and speaks to bonuses and ad hoc payments. So at this time, what's included in that letter is reportable as pensionable compensation, but that's a living document. So yeah, it could, depending on how it plays out.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, along with what Terrence just said, is that the term normal, I think as it says in the statute, normal monthly rate of pay. I mean, so that's something that we are still analyzing. That I think that's something that's going to play out in the regulation process. So obviously you guys should be involved as we go through these regs and adopt these regs. So, that is something that we will define. And so it could, it could be that things have to be paid monthly, not in a lump sum, not at quarterly, but it all depends on how those regs play out. But I think that'll be something that we will define.
Where's the mic? Oh, Sherry.
I just had a comment based on what she had said about having pensionable compensation for good attendance. I was told years ago that's not PERS creditable. Yeah, I was told not to report it, so.
For our classic members, it must be contained in 571, and a bonus for attendance is not
I don't see
contained in
that.
571. It's an exclusive affirmative list that specifically defines all the items of special comp. So in that case, that's not an item of reportable comp.
I have a few things. First of all, reportable compensation. It would be nice to just have a whole meeting with PERS and STRS on just that, because I'm finding that I'm being told something different than the other counties. I realize it's a training thing, but if they're being told and trained something different than I'm being told, it's a problem. We need to be consistent throughout the state. So I'd just, at a future meeting, I'd like that to be a topic. And it would be nice to have both of them, because recently it's it seems like recently STRS has been applying very specific rules. These are what our positions are reportable to STRS, and it says in the PERS manual, if it's not STRSable, it's PERSable. So we have certificated positions that are PERS, according to what they're following on their regs. And it seems to me that we need a consistent meeting with both of you. This is what goes to PERS. This is what, it's not because it's certificated it goes to STRS. It may be certificated and it needs to go to PERS. And so I'd like more discussion on that. And then also I wanted to mention, you know, that you have the employer rate the same for new and current. Actually, I don't know if you're planning on changing that. Me personally, I like it because if I want to change employers, I feel somewhere down the line, if you make it cheaper to hire the new members, it could count against me being a current member because it would cost the employer more. So, and then I have a question, I think it's for Danny, because it's still up in the air or on whether new school members can negotiate to pay part of the employer cost, because maybe they want to get a pay raise. It's like, okay, we'll give you pay raise if you pay part of the employer cost. And it specifically says on this PowerPoint, it's for current, what is that, 20516? But it's under current. So is that still up in the air, or is it an absolute no? New school members cannot negotiate to pay part of the employer rate.
Well, I think that for new members, PEPA already, the way PEPA is written, it says they shall pay at least half the normal cost. But they can, if you look in that whole section 7522.30, they can agree through collective bargaining to pay a higher amount. So I think it's a different process probably for new members and existing employees. For existing employees, they amended our 20516, which actually only applies to contracting agencies. So unless you're a contracting agency, technically for your existing employees, you cannot contract to pay employer share. I guess you can agree to it through collective bargaining outside of CalPERS, but I do not believe you can then come to us and amend your contract because you don't have an individual contract with us. There's one big school pool. So that 20516 applies to contracting agencies, and it allows them to contract and pay a portion of the employer share.
Okay, so now I'm confused even more. Can employees, current, can they, I mean, because we don't have that, but we foresee that new members may want to, in lieu of, here, you give us this, we'll pay part of the employer portion. In your opinion, can they do that? For schools?
My opinion, I mean, I think it comes out to the same thing. My opinion is that new school members can negotiate to pay a higher employer contribution. So I think it's kind of a nuance the way we're saying it. So we're setting the rate now that the normal cost is 12 or whatever it is, 12.1. The employee's paying 6, the employer's paying 6. What we're saying is that the statute allows the employee to negotiate to pay more than 6%. But I think we would call it, I mean, in a sense, they are paying part of the employer's share, but I think it's just a different operation. It's different government code sections. So they're agreeing to increase their employee contribution. Versus in the current Pearl section, the employee agrees, their employee contribution stays at 7, but what we do is they agree to pay more and we put it on top of that, right? We don't change their employee contribution from 7 to 10. We say their employer contribution is 7, but they've agreed to pay 3 for a total of 10. Where I think for new members, they actually have the ability to say, hey, we're going to negotiate to pay a higher employee contribution. We pay 6, we're going to pay 8. So the employee contribution is 8, which then automatically reduces the employer contribution.
So you kind of have 3 scenarios there, right? Under 20516, you have the normal member rate plus the cost sharing rate. Then you have the informal agreement where the member rate stays what it is, right? And then that other money's fed to the employer. And then you have this third option where the the member rate is set at just one higher rate, whatever you agree to, say 10%. And so that becomes the member rate. So there's kind of like those three different options.
I think I'm looking at the second one, where it's you see,
We see
just
the
same
normal
thing.
member rate,
Right,
and
but they're
you're
actually
feeding
paying.
the money to the employer in return for something, and the employer rate stays the same. Because in that first example, the employer rate actually goes down because the member rate goes up. But in these cases, the member money just funds the employer coffer to then pay the employer rates.
My last thing is that, because the PERS it's very confusing. You have that questionnaire and everything, it would be nice to have you put out a decision tree, because once you have the questions answered, it's nice to have something to say, oh, okay, here's the scenario. Do I make them a current or a new? Just a suggestion.
Yeah. We had talked about that. So. She's been waiting.
I'm sorry, we need to get to this woman. She's been very patient
Yeah, I
with her
know.
question.
I know.
On the overtime topic, can you define again, we're saying over 40 hours a week. What about someone that's working less than 40 hours a week, but the over 8 hours in a given day? We try to go by the 184-hour a month rule, but what about in excess of 8 hours a day? Is that PERSable or is it not?
What do you have? I mean, the law says 40 hours a week, so we really look to that to define it. I don't know if Terrence has any.
That is, the law does say up to 40 hours a week. So for CalPERS purposes, they're paid at their wage up to 40 hours per week. Beyond that, wouldn't be reportable. And it sounds like the situation you're speaking to is maybe you pay time and a half beyond the normal rate of pay should be paid up to 40 hours per week.
Okay.
And reported to CalPERS. There shouldn't be that overtime reported.
Okay,
Normal rate of pay.
okay, thank you.
They may be paid more, but what's reported to CalPERS.
And that's what we do. We're using their normal rate of pay up to,
40 hours a week. Or
well,
you're
we're using the
yeah,
184, but how
that's-
that
yeah.
applies, I don't know this morning.
Yeah.
I think we can
think we
take
need
one
to-
more question, and then
Okay.
we're going to need to switch over. And please, you've gotten email addresses. You can always address your questions to CalPERS, and I'm sure that CalPERS would be willing to post those questions and answers in an FAQ area to the extent that those are appropriate for that kind of distribution.
I'm going back to EPMC. If we have an MOU that specifically says the employer is going to pay 7% for new members, we should only report the 6%, right?
Is that what we're saying?
What do we
Doing
do with
de
the extra
facto-
1%?
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to go back and check. What we're saying is that even if you pay 7% for that new member, only 6% of that would go into their account. We're thinking that other 1% would go to the member's account. But that's something we need to go back and verify, because we believe it's been set up that the member contribution rate for new members is 6%. And that's what we're expecting to receive, and that's what will go into the member's account. If you send us more, we need to go back and find out what will happen to that.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I know, and while we're doing this setup, so Bill, come on up. While we're doing this switchover, I know that these are complicated issues and that you all want to get them right. So I appreciate your patience with us as we try and share information. Both systems are updating their information on a regular basis because things continue to emerge. So it looks like Bill and Cassie, you're ready to go.
Okay, so playing Bill today is going to be Cassie Maudbeck. No, we're actually tag teaming this presentation, but she's going to take the first few sections. For those that don't know us, I'm Bill Frericks. I'm a manager, one of the managers of Member Account Services. I'm over employer training, the business readiness team, and we also have some system people on our team as well. So I've been involved with the system changes for AB 340. Cassie's been involved with the analysis and the implementation as well, so she's just as familiar as I am. She can field your questions, and she's going to take it from here.
Thanks, Bill.
Good morning, or good afternoon almost. So, We are going to go over recent CalSTRS system changes, so stuff that went in January 1st. Future CalSTRS system changes. We're going to talk about some things that you guys might want to consider with system changes coming up, and resources, and we'll do questions after each little section. So the first one is the recent CalSTRS system changes. So you guys might have noticed, but as of January 1st, any account that's been established for the very first time in START will default as a 2% at 62 member. So that is using REAP or the MR87 process. And the 2% at 62 members cannot have their account backdated prior to January 1st, 2013. So I'm not sure if you guys have come across this yet, but if you are going into the system and establishing somebody for the very first time, you cannot have an effective date prior to January 1st, 2013. The system will not allow you to do it. If you have a situation like that, you can contact your member account services representative, especially if you have a situation where you're trying to report lines maybe for somebody and the system is preventing you from doing that. Please contact your member account services representative. There is a new indicator on REAP, which we're going to show you in the next couple slides, that will distinguish which retirement formula the member's in. There's a new column on the match file on the very right-hand side of the match file that tells you which retirement formula the member's in. And we have a new edit, which we'll go over, that will prevent contribution code 6s for 2% at 62 members that went in as of January 1st as well. So this next one, it might be hard to see on the screens, but hopefully you guys are following along. This is on the person account tab within REAP. And if you look below the member's name and the tax ID, that's where you'll find the retirement formula, either 2% at 60 or 2% at 62. So you'll see it there. It's also on the update tab in REAP. If you look below, it's below the LAUSD number, you would see which retirement formula the person has been put into. The next one shows you an example of the error message you would get if you were trying to establish somebody for the very first time after January 1st, 2013. So let's say today, and you were trying to put an effective date for December 1st, 2012. This is the error message that you would get, that the effective date cannot precede 1/1/2013 for 2% at 62
Cassie,
members.
can you move forward a slide? Because I think you're speaking just ahead of your
Sorry.
slides.
Yes, thank you. So that error message, that's an example of what the error message looks like if you were to have that problem. The next slide is an example of the match file response. So you see at the very end, there's a new column, the retirement formula column. So that's where you'll be able to tell if the member is in 2% at 60 or 2% at 62 retirement formula. Now, I said we had a new business rule, so that is Business Rule 114, and that is to prevent special compensation for 2% at 62 members. This is for direct DBS reporting, so when you use the assignment code 71, or just how you would normally report a car allowance or things like that. So this business rule will prevent that for 2% at 62 members. If you've noticed the note below, we said that in the next release we'll actually be modifying this error, so I'll talk about that in the next couple slides. We'll be modifying this business rule. Is there any questions about that before we move on to what we're going to be implementing in the future? No questions so far? Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm HR, so I'm not the business side, so I'm not reporting.
Okay.
But I always attach CC6 to special comp. Okay, so are there some special comp that are not CC6?
This is this is just for CC6s. So it would be
Are those the ones that just go directly to DBS then? Because there are special comp that go into DB?
correct. Yes.
Okay, and
There's-
those are not CC6?
They are CC6s as well.
Okay,
Yes, so you have
so-
some special compensation that stay into the defined benefit, and then you have some special compensation, and this is for current 2% at 60 members. You have some special compensation that goes directly to DBS, and it's distinguished with a different assignment code. So this business rule will not allow those for 2% at 62 members.
So, okay, because we were told at the previous meetings, no CC6s for the new members, but then we got that employer directive.
Yes.
That was clarifying, and so then our business person emailed our tech, and he said that that there are some special comps that'll still be reportable for the new members, which would be like the master stipend, CLAD, B-CLAD longevity. So I'm getting confused.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
no, that's okay. That's correct. When I said that we're going to be modifying it, I'm going to actually go over that in the next couple slides. But you are correct there. After looking at the law, we feel that there are a couple special compensations that are still considered credible for 2% at 62 members. So I'll go over that, and then Joycelyn's also going to touch on that too. But no, that's okay. No problem. And then anything else? Okay, I'm going to go over the future CalSTRS system changes. So our next phase will happen February 2013, and part of that will be implementing a new business rule to prevent reporting data prior to an established effective date. So what that means, if you have an effective date of, let's say, January 1st, 2013, we want to make sure that payroll lines cannot come in prior to January 1st, 2013. Currently, that is not an issue for member lines. So if you were to try and report a member line prior to an effective date, you would get the edit 007. There is a loophole, though, for non-member lines, so this business rule will take care of that so that non-member lines could not be reported prior to the effective date. And that will go in February. That's going to be business rule 083. And the other one is kind of what Sherry brought up. We're going to be modifying business rule 114, what I just went over, that said no CC6s for 2% at 62. We're modifying it to say that for members with the retirement formula of 2% at 62, there are certain special compensation that can be reported, but you would need to use an assignment code 72. So it's a new assignment code that is only for 2% at 62 members. So credible compensation is based off of the normal monthly rate of pay or base pay, but we had a lot of questions, I think, in the last EAC about what if a master's stipend would be on the salary schedule or longevity or things like that. So we went back and took a look at a lot of those things. And we feel like things like master's stipends, educational certificates, things like that, that a member receives a stipend for performing that job could be argued as part of the monthly base of pay. If it's in your salary schedule, you would report, if it's in the matrix of the salary, it's salary. But if it's not, because I know some people have said it's on the pay schedule, maybe like a asterisk below for a master's stipend, we pay $1,500 or things like that. This is an avenue for you guys to report it as a CC6, but it's very limited special compensation. Car allowance is still not credible for 2% at 62. Cash in lieu is not credible for 2% at 62. One-time ad hoc payments are not creditable, so it cannot meet those definitions. So I know that is different from what we said at last EAC, so if there's questions about that, we can go ahead and take those now before we move on, because we are sure there's a lot of questions. Carmen, do you want to go ahead? Oh, okay.
Okay, so for the new people, and we code them assignment code 72, it's really going to be up to the employer to make sure that they're coding the correct types of special comp as 72 and not including everything else that is creditable for current members, correct? Will there be edits in the system or caps in the system that has a threshold that this looks like a little too much or not enough?
was going to answer.
As far as the threshold goes, so there's already an existing edit that monitors special compensation thresholds. I think it's 15,000 for the fiscal year. We're looking at introducing, well, either modifying that one or introducing a new one for 2% at 62, and it would be a much lower amount, like, I don't know, we're thinking $3,000-$4,000.
And that threshold is combined or per item?
I think it would be combined.
Well, we haven't really designed how it's going to work. I would think it would be combined, but I can't really say exactly what it's going to be right now.
I have two questions. Sorry about that. It wasn't on. The first one is from Jerry, and it says, I thought the effective date is when the job was offered to the new certificated employee, not when entered into the system. So I guess a clarification on that.
So clarification on what a new member is. A new
Yes.
member is based off of the first hire date to perform credible service. So they are correct. It's based off of the first hire date to perform credible service.
So when it's offered, if it's before.
When they're first hired.
Oh, okay, when they first hired. And then the second question is from Laura. Would CalSTRS consider publishing a matrix that would list the common types of special compensation and whether or not they are credible under the new 2% at 62 retirement formula? Employer Directive 2012-07 specifies on page 3, last paragraph, that certain payments, such as master's stipends, are considered credible compensation as long as they are identified on a salary schedule or other publicly available document. We need to be able to identify what these certain payments are, and I thought maybe a matrix would make it easier for everyone.
I can definitely bring that back, but I don't think we're doing that as of right now. If there's confusion on if you should be reporting this as a CC6 with an assignment code 72, we would say to contact your member account services representative, and they would help you determine if this meets the definition of credible service or if it doesn't meet the definition of credible service. Any other questions?
I want to clarify what you just, your answer, where you said
Okay.
first hire.
Okay.
Because this is the time of the year, like you're hiring somebody for the second semester. You
Mhm.
hire them in December, but they don't actually start till January.
Okay.
So in the past, I thought we used to use effective date. So if you start on January 3rd, that would determine your date, not your hire date, which was in December.
AB 340 for CalSTRS specifically says that a new member is based off of the hire date, the first hire date to perform credible service. So if their very first hire date was prior to 1/1/2013, they would be considered 2% at 60 members. If their first hire date to perform credible service was after 1/1/2013, they would be considered 2% at 62 members.
So if we hired a bunch of new subs, fresh out of school in November and December, they have never performed a day of service, they would be under the old rate, the old contract.
If they were considered hired to perform credible service and it was prior to 1/1/2013, yes, they don't have to perform service to be counted in that retirement formula.
They don't have, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
This is a kind of an odd situation because we actually hire people
Okay.
In case we need them.
Right.
And then sometimes they don't get called to work.
Okay.
So they could have been hired 2 years ago and never worked, hired again the next year, never worked, hired again the next year. So if they finally start working in 2013, they're on the old rule?
If they were considered, first hired to perform credible service,
Right.
what would happen is if you didn't establish them until, let's say, 4 years from that date, the system wouldn't allow you to put an effective date back then. So you would, the member would essentially have to go through an appeal process to say, hey, I was hired way back here. I should be in the 2% at 60 formula for a situation like that.
Okay. Yeah.
I have another question from. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I have another question from out in the field. From Kay of Ventura County. Do the new Contribution Code 6 requirements also apply to cash balance members or defined benefit only? And will future legislation take into account the cash balance members?
So the question was, does the new Assignment Code 72 and CC6 apply to cash balance members? And the answer is no, it applies just to defined benefit. And the other question was,
Will future legislation take into account the cash balance members?
So the future legislation to take into account cash balance members, I'm going to let Joycelyn answer that. She's actually going to go over that in her presentation coming up. So hang tight for that question. It's coming. Any other questions?
My question on the hire to perform creditable service for the sub scenario.
Okay.
When we hire subs, they fill out that form. What is it? EO350, whatever
Okay.
it is.
Yes. the
And
permissive
if
election
they
form.
do not physically work, so they were hired in December, if they physically do not begin working until 2013, currently, I believe CalSTRS or somewhere that effective date on that form is changed to match the service period that we report their wages. Wouldn't that put them in a situation where they were hired in 2013 versus 2012?
We should actually be honoring the date the member signed the 350. So we can take a look at that for you. But it should be the date that they signed the election form saying they wanted to be a member of the defined benefit that would guide us into which retirement formula they're supposed to be in.
Okay, so we'll have to pay closer attention to the effective date with that, because I thought that date was being changed to match when service was being reported.
Yeah, I can take a look at that for you afterwards, yeah.
I just want to ask clarification on the situation if you were not able to enroll a member and they were hired prior to the 1/1.
Okay.
All along, I was under the impression that it would be up to the employee to prove that they were hired. But it's my understanding that we were recently told in our office from someone at STRS that it's the county offices, or there's going to be a time where it's our responsibility. I just want to get clarification just so we know.
I think it would depend on the situation. If it's preventing you from reporting payroll lines to us, you can contact your member account services representative, and we can work with you to get the documentation to change that. If you have an election form that didn't get entered in time, you can contact the county office. Contact us, our member account services representative, and we can work with you. If it's a situation where it's like 5, 6, 7 years down the road, that would be something that the member would have to appeal in order to get the retirement formula changed. But for right now, because we know that this kind of just took place, I would consult your member account services representative, and they can let you know if it's something that we can assist with or if it's something that the member would have to appeal.
So Carmen has one more question. Let's take that question, and then I would ask that you hold your other questions and ask Cassie or Bill after the meeting, because we do have that firm meeting close time, and I want to make sure that Joycelyn has a chance to talk about whatever it is she was going to cover.
Future legislation.
Future legislation.
The
Thank
question
you.
out in the field is, will CalSTRS continue processing change of base forms?
Will CalSTRS continue processing change of base forms? That is a question I will have to take back and get back to that person.
I will send you there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. So phase 3 and 4 will happen in fiscal year 2013, 2014. And a couple of those things are, we're going to modify START and SO to allow for different employee contribution rates for the 2% at 62 members, because those contribution rates could change. They are currently 8% for the 2% at 62 members, but they could change. So that will go in for the 2013-14, one of those phases. And the other one is to modify START and SO to monitor the compensation cap and allow for payroll lines with 0% contributions, because I think we said the last meeting and in the info sessions that for the 2% at 62 members, they will be paying contributions up into the cap. We still want to see the reporting lines for the whole assignment. You just wouldn't submit contributions for those. So we'll be working on that in phase 3 and 4 as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill for employer system considerations.
Thank you, Cassie. So I just have a couple of slides here. I want to talk about some of the employer system changes that I hope you've already been thinking about and probably acted on some of these. But we do have more changes coming down the road, as Cassie just went into, and I just wanted to go over those and get you thinking about those and plan essentially for these changes. I think the first one, of course, is identifying this new population, the 2% at 62 members. You should probably have a way in your systems or talk to your vendors to identify those new members because of the new rules that apply to them, the special comp rules, the 50% normal cost. So that's going to affect the contributions you report for those members. Those are things you're going to have to consider on your end so you can programmatically account for this reporting. So the future contribution rate changes for 2% at 62 members, again, those can change now per fiscal year if the board takes action and determines that the normal cost is increased. So you could be in a situation where every year those contribution rates are changing for those new members. You want to think about changes to your system to accommodate that. I don't think this is a big deal because you already sort of deal with that with RWP. Those rates can change yearly. Elected official rates can change yearly. So I'm hopeful this isn't as big of an impact, but I just wanted to bring it up, get you thinking about it. The special compensation, Cassie went over the new assignment code, so that's going to be a new change. You're going to have to recognize special compensation for 2% at 62 members and be able to report that with the new assignment code 72. So that's another thing to think about. And this change will be in February, actually late January. So starting late January, we'll be able to accept that new code. The compensation cap, the 2% at 62 members, so that's the ability to identify or monitor compensation reported for 2% at 62. So like Cassie said, we want the full reporting for the position, but if that goes above the compensation cap, we don't want to see contributions for anything above the compensation cap. So you're going to have to be able to report maybe partial contributions if they're right at the cap, but maybe they're $1,000 short of meeting the cap. Well, the contributions, you'll only report a small part of that if they're really close to the cap. And then once they go over the cap, we don't want to see any contributions at all. So contributions will have to be zero on the reporting. So those are other changes that you need to consider and think about. And we're making those changes next fiscal year, probably early in the fiscal year. We're thinking September, around September. So any questions on potential system changes out there? Before I get to the questions, I do want to say, I want to sort of pimp my services here. I do have a business readiness team. We are here to assist you and help with addressing some of these changes and work through some of your issues, so please contact me if you need help. All right, questions, go ahead. Francis?
Okay, with the potential of the rates changing for new people, will they be treated like we currently treat the employer rate? So it's based on the effective date of that rate? So that, let's say in 13-14, the rate goes to 8.5%, and then jumps to 9%, jumps to 10%. So for each year, if we have to go back and maybe adjust, do something for that year, then we would use a rate that was effective for that year?
That's correct. So whatever rate's in effect for that fiscal year, if you have a prior year adjustment, you would use the rate that was in effect for that year.
Okay. To identify or to differentiate between current and new, are we going to have to, other than the account code 72 or assignment code 72, is there going to be a new code structure set in place?
Say that one more time.
Okay, we've got a new code structure for special comp of 72 for the new people.
Okay.
For certain special comp. Is there going to be additional code structure for assignment code for the new people because of the cap, because of reporting without contributions?
At this time, we're not planning to introduce some, like a new member code you're thinking to
Yes,
identify?
Yes.
No.
Instead of a 57, an 87.
We have
a
not
65.
considered a new member code or some way to identify this new population. Let me ask you this. Maybe I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. We have kicked around the idea of feeding that back into SEW. So sort of like when you upload your F-196 file, your defined benefit contribution file, feeding it back and identifying who these people are so you can sort of filter and sort and see who these people are on the file and in so while you're dealing with the reporting. Is that something that you would be interested in? Because at this time, we don't plan on identifying this special population any.
It would be ideal for balancing and knowing how much money we need to make sure we're remitting.
That's what we thought too.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take that back.
I think that would go along with ours because my IT person is saying the two districts that are reporting where we just kind of add them to our file and we send to you, he's saying there's going to be a problem whenever you change the rates, that he's not going to be able to confirm the information they're sending to us. Like they do with what's in our system, we can confirm everything. We're putting the limits in there and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to be able to do that with the two districts that just get added to our reports. So they're saying, you know, if we don't have a way to do that, they want you guys to, because I know it's in the future that these districts are going to be able to report directly to STRS, and they're saying they would like for you to do that, have them report directly to STRS before you change any rates.
Well,
Okay.
I don't know if we can do that, but
Or figure out something where whatever file they're sending over, we can confirm the information that we're adding
well, sure.
to ours.
I mean, there's going to be business rules that are going to monitor the contributions, and it's going to, tell you if it's over, under.
So even what they're adding to ours?
Right. So we're going to compensate in our system when these rates change, yearly. Well, we're going to have a table essentially that drives the business rule that looks at the contributions on the line and says, oh, for 13-14, the contribution rate is 9%. And I'm totally making this up, so don't think that's the case. So it's going to look at that table and say, okay, 13-14 is the service period that this line represents. The rate should be 9%. I'm going to do the calculation, and the contribution should be based on that. If it's different, you're going to get an error that says the contributions are off.
I think he's talking about, he was saying something about the new members and the current members, if the rates are different between them, that for some reason it's going to cause a problem. I don't know what it has to do with the file that's getting sent over to being added to ours, but he's saying there's going to be a problem if
you could
they
email
keep-
me like an example
I
or
will have him
specifics,
email you.
that sounds perfect.
Did you want to take any more questions, or?
I think we can actually, I think we're going to have to hold questions so that we have Joycelyn make some final comments.
I just have a comment. I would really prefer to see a new assignment code. I think that would be easier for our end in doing the programming changes.
We'll take that back. Cass and I are going to stick around afterwards, so please come seek us out if you have any other questions. Real quick, just to finish this up, there's resources out there on the Secure Employer website that we don't have the FAQs published yet, but those FAQs represent the questions that were asked during the info sessions. We'll also add the questions that were asked today to that FAQ, and we hope to have that published this week or early next week, but we'll see.
And while Joycelyn's coming up, thank you, Bill and
Yep.
Cassie. While Joycelyn's coming up, I just wanted to note that we do have an item on the agenda for we'll figure out whether we can do it at the next meeting or at a subsequent meeting on clarification of what credible comp is for each system, and we'll work with the two systems together to make a decision about if that's presented in a joint session or separate sessions, and how we'll get that available to you. But we heard the request. Joycelyn.
Good morning. I have some updates based on feedback we received from legislative staff on some of the open-ended questions we had for my presentation at the last EAC meeting. As Ed mentioned, everything that Bill and Cassie told you is what's going in right now. It's being implemented according to the current law. So what I'm telling you about are things that may be in legislation this upcoming year. So we have to wait until they're introduced, they go through the process, get signed by the governor, and then we would start implementation on some of these items. But I can provide some feedback, so I'm happy to do that. As Bill and Cassie mentioned, with the Assignment Code 72, there's some of those certain types of compensation that can be reported for the 2% at 62 members. There will be some language, I'm hoping it goes into the urgency bill that will make that extra clear. So that's one thing, what they said stands, but I'm hoping that, that it's totally clear in the law on that front. One thing that Assignment Code 72 doesn't cover and won't be covered in the urgency bill are things such as parity pay, lottery payments, overload pay, because those things don't necessarily happen regularly and they don't necessarily recur for everyone. And so we heard from legislative staff that they think that some of those things are reasonable as being reported for the 2% at 62 members. So in the conforming bill that you heard mentioned earlier when Mary Ann spoke, which will be a separate bill, there may be some language that would allow for some of those items to be creditable specifically for CalSTRS in the teacher's retirement law. We have to wait to see what form that takes. But those are some other types of pay that we have heard about and that the legislature thinks should be maybe included. On the new member definition, we talked about, you guys dove into that a little bit. The legislature is discussing that idea as a whole, but what I can tell you is that they did mean for members with concurrent membership prior to 1/1/13, who then take a CalSTRS position. If they performed work in the previous 6 months, they should be considered 2% at 60 members under the current benefit formula. So that's something we're also hoping goes into the urgency bill, into SB 13, to provide that clarification. So when that bill goes through, there'll be implementation on that front since it doesn't exist right now in the law. On the compensation cap, this one's more minor, but it's calendar year in the law right now. We're hoping for CalSTRS that'll be changed to a fiscal year basis. We're hoping that right now it's tied to the valuation. We want to break that tie because there's really no reason to tie it to the valuation. And then if they do make those changes for us, the first adjustment that we might see in that we're hoping would be July 1, 2014. So 18 months out. On the contribution rates, as you heard, for 2% at 62 members, it's 50% of normal cost. One of the things SB 13 does that does affect CalSTRS more seriously is that it does say, it used to be the comparison, at least 50% of normal cost or the current contribution rate, whichever is greater. They meant for that to the current contribution rate only if that current contribution rate was bargained. So there is language in SB 13 that says that. So we don't get to do the comparison anymore because our current contribution rate, there's no negotiating for that. So it is just, like Ed said, the board determines the normal cost, and then we take 50% of that for new members, and that's going to be their contribution rate. There's no change to the employer contribution rate or the state contribution rate in AB 340. So those remain. The board won't be changing those in the future. They stay the same. And one of the things that I know this is different from CalPERS is that it does say in there that employees can bargain for a higher contribution rate. The legislature did not intend for that to apply to CalSTRS members. They intended for that to apply to members who already can bargain for their contribution rates. So that's not in the law yet, but it will be coming, given what their feedback was, that would only be for those systems where the rates are bargained for, so not for our members. And again, that's different, it sounded like, than what CalPERS has gotten feedback on and how they're reading the law. On employer-paid member contributions, I think there's some good direction in the directive for you, but the legislature did intend to allow existing members to have access to employer-paid member contributions. Now, the way the law reads right now, it's not really possible because you have to provide that to the entire class of employees, and you probably have 2% at 60 and 2% at 62 members in that class of employees. It cannot be provided to the 2% at 62 members. So once we see the law change, and if we do, then we'll change our law so that it allows for, in the class of employees, there to be a difference that contributions can be paid for by the employer for the 2% at 60 members. And similarly, for bargained one-year final compensation, the legislature intended to allow existing members to still have access to that bargained one-year final compensation. Again, for the time being, because the law hasn't been changed, that benefit, if you will, has to be provided to all classroom teachers, and likely you'll have both groups in your classroom teachers, so you can't provide that benefit to that whole group. So you have to wait till the law changes, but then we'll get it and if it moves through the process, we'll get it so that the 2% at 60 members can have that benefit provided to them if they bargain for it. And this one's really minor, probably for you. Hopefully you don't run into this, but on felony forfeiture, we sought some clarification because it mentioned what benefits were lost. It mentioned both all benefits and then retirement benefits. And the legislature intended that if anyone gets caught in this and loses their, and gets convicted of a felony, they would lose all of their rights and benefits under the system. So disability, survivor benefits, retirement benefits, everything. And then the question came up on cash balance. The legislature didn't make any changes to the cash balance sections of our law in AB 340. So right now there are no changes that we can implement, but they did intend for that program to continue, and they did intend for the provisions of AB 340 that can apply to apply. So we'll be seeking changes in the conforming bill to make that happen. But again, we have to wait till it gets passed and signed for us to implement that. And if I didn't mention, there was only the two provisions that I think will be in the urgency bill on the new member definition, limits on types of credible compensation. Everything else we'll be looking for in a separate conforming bill for CalSTRS. So I can briefly take.
So we don't have any time for questions. I thank you all for your attentiveness today. It's been a rather intense session. Please know that our staff will be staying around. If you have additional questions for them, you need to take them into the Sacramento River room or out into the hallway. We need to vacate this room in order to do board setup. Thank you very much.